Thank you for joining me for another quick hits conversation. I'm Dr. Robyn. With me today, I have Domenico Ciarallo, Michael Paperno, and Brandon Mahoney. And I want to ask the question, how do you tactfully tell someone that a conversation is going in circles? Michael, can you kick us off?
Sure, Dr. Robyn. It's a tough thing to tackle. And I always say to myself, okay, I have to diagnose why this is going in circles. Because if I can really figure out what's going on here, then I can choose the right approach to tackle it. So is it a misunderstanding? Is it someone who just missed it or wasn't listening or was distracted? Or is it really someone who's got an ego that you're never going to convince, or someone with an agenda that you're not going to move the needle on? So I really think that diagnosis is really the key. And then you can think about how to actually come to a resolution where the meeting becomes or a conversation becomes productive again. Because if you're just circling and circling and circling, you're not going to get anywhere.
I think that's a great point. My first thought was, if I'm having a conversation that's kind of looping around and around, I stop and say, okay, so we want this, we want X, we want Y, we want Z. What else? And that's my way of being polite in trying to break this cycle of repeat to make sure we're all on the same page, and so we don't have to talk about that topic again and again.
I guess as an entrepreneur, I have a bit of a short fuse when it comes to ruminating and going over things over and over again. And when I read the question, the first thing that came to mind was, you don't want to beat a dead horse. And that's the problem with a lot of people, is that they keep, whether it's their personal life or their business life, they keep going over and over the subject again and again and again. And it's been said and done, and it's time to move on. And honestly, I guess coming from a background of being an entrepreneur, I'm short and sweet when it comes to that, because I have no time to waste on things when it's been settled and done, as Brandon and Michael said already.
I think that a lot of times something going in circles happens because the goal of the conversation, or especially if it's a formal meeting, aren't clear from the start. Because if you make sure that the goal is clear, not just an agenda, but the actual goal, like what are we supposed to have done by the end of this interaction? And it doesn't have to be a decision. It can just be a goal, like we want to get a bunch of ideas out on the table, or we want to decide what a timeline is, or something like that. If the goal is clear, then you can use that goal to bring people back on track. We only have, and use the clock to your advantage as the bad guy. We only have 20 minutes left. Remember, we want to try to accomplish this. Can we move on and maybe revisit this issue later, or take it as a sidebar?
I asked somebody, I can't take credit for these two, which is I have them written down. I asked somebody last week, after we had this on LinkedIn conversation, I said, how do you do this? And he said that in meetings, he often will say, oh yes, let's go back to that if he feels like it needs to be revisited. So he'll make it clear that we talked about this, but yeah, maybe we can go back to that. Or he'll say something like, okay, let's have another look at that. So that's one way he politely does allow it to circle back. So that's one option. But if you're at the point where you're like, okay, we've talked about this, let's not circle back to it, I think that's a different problem.
I think what Michael said about having a strategy as you go into that is the best thing, because that is your definition of where you are and where you're going. And when you've been there and done that, it's not insulting to somebody to say to them, listen, we've discussed this, we've come to a conclusion on it, we're going over something that we should move on from. So as long as the rules and regulations or the barriers are set up at the beginning, there's no harm in hurting somebody's feelings. You're not going to hurt somebody's feelings saying, listen, we've said this enough. It's time to move on.
Russ is really good. My husband, Russ, is really good at that. He'll sometimes, he's only done it once or twice in our whole marriage, but he said to me, Robyn, we've had this conversation. You know where I stand. I'm not having it with you again. And I'm like, he's right. Oh, I do know. Okay. And I have to say, all right, that's fine.
And sometimes you just need a break from the conversation. If you are truly at odds and everybody keeps just going back to defending their position, then there's a bigger issue at hand usually. And sometimes you need the time to step away from it and think about how to come back to it, maybe from another angle, or maybe with a little bit more of a compromise than you were willing to do before. Because a lot of times we bring a lot of emotion to these interactions, especially in disagreement.
In these conversations, I always think back to my team and what I've done when they've come back to me with something we've already discussed. And usually I think about it from the standpoint of, Is there something that's still in your mind that we didn't cover within that topic that you're still concerned about? Are you unclear about something and you were just afraid to bring it up the first time? Maybe you've had more time to think about it and that's why it's coming back up, because you've had some more clarity on the conversation or the topic rather. That's the way I'm doing it right now is all the times that my team has done that to me.
And so do you ask them those questions specifically when they bring it back up? Like, okay, why are we bringing this back up? Or do you just dive in and try to figure it out as you go?
It's almost exactly that. It's like, okay, so we discussed this last week. We agreed on X, Y, and Z. Was there something we're not clear about? And giving them the opportunity to then explain to me why they're bringing this up yet again.
Michael, you made a good point when you talked earlier. I think in any situation, there's a sender and the receiver. And is the sender getting out the message? And if they are, is the receiver having some problems understanding what's going on? And that's where you have to kind of look back at and saying, you know, we're sitting in a group, this guy's leading a meeting, he's spearheading it, he's giving the strategy, but it seems like there's a couple of people in the room that are not just getting it. So I think that's the point which you had mentioned, it's really important, is that this just got to get across from A to B.
That's a great point. And that's a lot of what, you know, in my business, when I do a lot of coaching, a lot of times I help people put together really great, impactful, powerful presentations. And a lot of times I say to them, if someone asks you a question at the end and you feel you've covered it in your presentation, guess what? Either they were distracted or it was your fault. It wasn't clear enough. So, and if it's your fault, you don't want to go back at them and say, well, like I said before, or as I mentioned, because that's pointing a finger at that person and saying, you missed it, or you're not intelligent enough to have caught it. And we don't want that to happen. So you're absolutely right, Domenico. It's just because you feel you've sent the message clearly does not mean that it's been received in the way that you intend.
Yeah, and I like the way you said that, because you don't want to insult somebody or hurt somebody's feelings by belittling them, whether it be one-on-one or in a group setting, worse even in a group setting. You have to be tactful in that, but you're totally right on that point.
And is there something different if this happens via email? Because we're talking about if you're having a conversation with someone and they bring something back up, but is it handled differently if it's an email conversation where you're like, sometimes I'm like, just scroll down and reread it.
Per my previous email, I think is the route you take.
Right. But that's basically, like I said before.
Right.
Yeah, I think you can be a little tougher on emails because you're hiding behind that laptop or that screen. I think face to face, especially one-on-one, or like I said, in a group, you have to be very, very tactful as you proceed, as Michael said. But emails, let it all fly.
My favorite with the email is not only when they point out that they said it before, but they forward you the message where they told you it as well. So that's like a double pow pow, you know, you missed it, dummy. But I really feel like, and that happens. And I think you're right. It's easier to be a little bit more curt and forceful when you're not looking at someone face to face because you're hiding behind that keyboard. But I really think that if we can all step back for a minute and just think before we send that email and really think about the person on the other side. Because when we compose an email, it's really for you, you're composing it for you and what you need from someone usually. Right. You're not necessarily composing it for them. Yeah.
And the thing about an email, it's a paper trail. A lot of times when you have a conversation with somebody, if it's not recorded, you know, he said, she said. But on an email, it's written in stone, and people have, you know, they can put that in your face and say, hey, listen, you sent this to me. You know, it was really a little bit unacceptable to be reprimanded like this or be spoken to. So there's a good side of an email and there's a bad side of an email. Paper trail is important.
But when it's going in circles through email, I mean, if you've emailed twice on the same issue and you're still not resolved, time to have a meeting or pick up the phone or send it or do a Teams call or something, a Slack call. Something.
Well, Brandon actually said that in a previous quick hits. We were talking about response time on emails. And Brandon, what did you say was your reply after the first email?
Reply to the first email? Oh, my.
Back and forth, you said
he said he picks up the phone.
Call.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Sure. You have to.
Yeah. And it's faster, although it does seem that nobody answers the phone anymore. So that's a whole separate problem. But if a conversation is going in circles, the best thing that you can do is notice it and then politely say, I think we're going in circles. I don't know what's happening here, but this isn't working. And I've actually made a joke about it before where I'm like, I don't know, either I'm lost or you're lost or we're both lost because this is not working at all. Let's try this again. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. That is our 10 minutes. I appreciate it. I'm so glad we didn't talk in circles. I'll talk to you all again very soon.
Bye.
Bye.